On the evening of September 3rd, 1878, there was no open ocean, no perilous storm, and no multi-day voyage ahead. It was just the calm waters of the Thames River cutting through London. The Princess Alice, a wooden paddle steamer, was returning from a day out. Its open decks were packed with families, children, and day trippers heading home on what was advertised as a routine moonlight trip. Then, around 7:40 p.m., a massive 1,300-ton iron coal freighter violently broadsided the side of the wooden passenger ship. In less than 5 minutes, the small steamer broke apart and sank to the riverbed. Nearly 650 people died in the water. To understand how a loss of life this massive happens on a narrow city river surrounded by nearby rescue boats, we have to look at 3 distinct traps that made survival nearly impossible. The first trap was the physical impact itself. You had a severe material mismatch. The Bywell Castle was a heavy, iron-hulled freighter bearing down on the Princess Alice, a highly fragile wooden vessel. The captains spotted each other in the dusk, but their attempts to maneuver past one another failed. The freighter's iron bow plowed directly into the right side of the steamboat, just in front of the paddle box. The sheer momentum of the iron freighter easily defeated the wooden structure. According to eyewitnesses on the river, the iron ship tore through the passenger vessel like slicing bread. The force of that collision snapped the steamer entirely in two, sending everyone on the open decks plunging into the river. But hundreds more never made it into the water. This was the second trap. Because night was falling and the air was getting cold, the majority of the passengers had crowded below deck to stay warm in the saloons. The collision triggered absolute chaos in those confined spaces. Overturned furniture blocked the aisles, and hundreds of panicked people rushed toward the narrow architectural stairwells. Within seconds, river water flooded through the breach, pushing against the escaping crowds and permanently sealing those tight passageways. Most of the victims that night didn't drown fighting the river's current. They died trapped inside a submerged wooden cage, where escaping was a mathematical impossibility. For the passengers who were on the upper decks and actually survived the initial sinking, a third trap was waiting for them on the surface. Decades earlier, the Great Stink of 1858 forced municipal engineer Joseph Bazalgette to redesign London's sewer system, moving waste away from the city center to save the population from disease. He built immense pumping stations at Crossness and Beckton in the east, designing massive tunnel networks to collect all of the city's effluent. This map of the Thames shows the layout of those new pumping stations. The system had a fatal flaw. The waste wasn't chemically treated. It was hoarded in giant holding tanks and flushed raw into the river whenever the tide was going out. As the highlight on the map shows, the active release points intersected perfectly with the exact location of the sinking ship. At the moment the Princess Alice went down, both stations were actively pumping. The Crossness station alone was actively releasing 114 million liters of raw human waste and industrial runoff directly into the exact site of the crash. The surviving passengers were forced to swim in a blinding, thick, toxic sludge that filled their lungs and made the rescue efforts of nearby boats incredibly difficult in the dark. The very engineering marvel built to cleanse London of disease ended up turning a chaotic shipwreck into an inescapable biological nightmare. The following day, temporary morgues were set up at the Woolwich dockyard. Desperate families wandered from site to site as bodies continued to wash ashore in the toxic surf for days. Because of loose safety regulations at the time, passenger ships on the Thames weren't required to keep a manifest. With no official record of who was on board, many of the victims were never identified. But the sheer scale of the disaster forced a political reckoning. The government could no longer ignore the lethal state of the river. By 1888, a sweeping mandate forced the opening of a massive precipitation system at Crossness. The dumping of raw sewage directly into the Thames finally stopped, and solid waste was shipped far out to sea instead. As for the Bywell Castle, the iron freighter that caused the collision, it faced no immediate consequences and simply went right back to work hauling cargo. Then, in January of 1883, just 5 years after the crash, the massive iron ship vanished without a trace off the coast of Portugal. The 650 victims of the Princess Alice forced a life-saving cleanup of London's waterways. while the iron hull that sent them into the river quietly erased itself from history.